This post may contain spoilers. At the time of publication, I will have invested nearly as many hours in writing this review as I have in playing Destiny 2. This isn't to say I'm done playing the game or haven't enjoyed the experience, only that it speaks to just how many steps backward were taken whilst the developers were attempting to push the bar forward. Ultimately, I believe what this game released as was something rushed and therefore plagued with numerous poor design choices. Please understand that I continue to adore the Destiny universe. I was simply hoping that old lessons wouldn't have to be relearned once more by Bungie. The second entry in this franchise, for better and worse, hit the reset button on Destiny 1's final form, seemingly leaving much in the hands of RNGesus. As a result, we have a game which tops the original base game of Destiny 1 regarding storyline, but lacks the same longevity hook of its predecessor. Thanks to all the updates and DLC, the final form of Destiny 1 is a game which does almost everything better than Destiny 2. I recognize that many players are perfectly at ease with a starting point for the new game being similar to that of the old game. Unfortunately, I am not that player. Destiny was billed as a 10-year experience. The release of Destiny 2 laid bare the sad fact that these are 3-year experiences at best. This is a good game, to be clear. Do not let the glowing reviews fool you, though. Destiny 2 does not connect to its former iteration in any meaningful way. There are a host of things which draw Destiny players in and keep them playing. Primarily the top-notch gunplay, reward system, settings, and social gaming structure. That last part is of particular importance for most Guardians. The first game introduced us to what remains the most seamless gaming experience to be had with friends. The ability to shift from story to multiplayer and everything in between in Destiny is something vastly lacking in most games currently on the market. I'm glad to say that little about this formula has changed in the second game. Many things have been improved upon as well, such as the ease of joining and promoting clans, the albeit very silly soccer activities in social spaces, and the addition of guided games. For those not in the know, guided games open up the world of co-op activities for solo players or clans looking to fill player slots while doing things like raiding. The developers could and should have gone further with this, and the limited nature of guided games is arbitrary. But here we do at least have progress. Ideally, clans would be able to build or decorate their very own social spaces, but maybe that's just like my opinion, man. The new clan banner feature is a start, though. While not immediately noticeable, the loot system has changed drastically. Weapons now have a singular set of possible perks, meaning every weapon of the same name is always going to be the same. You can change damage types on non-primaries, and there is a mod slot which can help weapons along. Still, these are minor modifications. The days of god rolls are gone. This will be the first of many limitations discussed. You'll also be seeing a stronger emphasis on the potential for microtransactions in Destiny 2. You don't have to buy anything, of course, but that doesn't stop the game from beating you over the head with visits to tests. Destiny offers a lot in the way of customization. The problem here is that the first game did almost everything better by the end. The exception to this is the way you're allowed to apply shaders to any individual piece of armor, legendary weapon, ship, ghost, etc. Even with that pro, however, comes the con of shaders dropping in limited uses, often not enough to apply to a full set of anything. Add to this that most of the shaders lack the punch of the first game, along with an inability to preview your character in full before application, and this is almost a ruined feature. Ships now add an effect to your character's location load, or revive. Not the space battles we dreamt of, but better than nothing. Most emotes are new, yet the game failed to allow updates to all emote commands, leaving you relegated to changing only one of the 4 emote buttons once again. Grenades, melees, jumps, ghosts, class items, and emblems are much the same as D1 in all respects. There are new exotic sparrows though, which offer cool perks, such as faster speeds and immediate summoning. A new ability tree called Class Ability was also added to each subclass, offering you the opportunity to create healing pools, dodge attacks for melee recharges, and so on. On the list of great ideas introduced in Destiny 2, this ranks near the top for me. Likewise, there are some new subclass types introduced for each class here. Again though, we weren't given something new without the loss of something else we'd grown to love. The Solar Warlock can no longer resurrect from a death, for example, having been replaced by a super which lets you hover while throwing swords of flame at your foes. In addition to this, each subclass now has only 2 preset perk trees to choose from. If you enjoyed being able to choose Quiver and Keen Scout at the same time on a Void Hunter, then prepare for disappointment. These limitations aren't as drastic as they first appear. You can still dependently choose your melee, jump, and grenade. Still, less customization is not a design choice made with longtime Destiny fans in mind. No new classes or damage types are introduced in Destiny 2, and every single subclass mission is the dullest of variations on a theme I can recall having endured. If Destiny ever hooks you, it's likely owed to the excellent feel of pulling just about any trigger in the game. That truth doesn't change in this outing. The button layout still comes like second nature after only a few minutes, movement is responsive, with jumps differing between classes for the sake of player preference, and the soundtrack is otherworldly. Weird textures and graphical clips are ever present in the game, but the views remain artwork to behold. Almost every location is based on a place which exists in our solar system, so this game also serves as a bit of wish fulfillment for space nerds like myself. The previous statement shouldn't lead you to expect perfection where the locations are concerned. The developers took even more drastic freedoms with reality in this outing than in the first. While they clearly tried to vary each locale to make it feel unique, the result is an uneven experience from one planetoid to another. Titan was a noteworthy disappointment for me due to its limited total area open for patrol and off-same visuals. Fast travel was a welcome addition to Destiny 2, but the feature doesn't exist in many explorable areas. This game also suffers from a continued absence of patrol missions in far-flung places, leaving you almost no reason to ever visit them. I should add that many of us were expecting Europa to be a playable area in this game. That I can see it in orbit while patrolling is insult to injury. Location maps were added in Destiny 2, which I like. What I don't like is the inability to see friends on the map or set waypoints wherever I please. It's also worth noting that this game should have made the leap to a truly open world model. The places you visit are once more limited to short distance boundaries, height restrictions, watery insta-deaths, and invisible walls. You also can't set fast travel while a patrol mission is active, which is annoying. The menu interfaces have been altered. Like most things here, this is hit and miss. The new model adopts Apple's 3-click standard, which, while resulting in fewer clicks once you know where to go in the menus, makes certain things more difficult to find than they used to be. As an example, roster and clan are now in two completely different menus, confusing me to no end. The quest page has been replaced with the overly simplistic milestones setup. These lack much in the way of secondary descriptions, which made the parsing of what needed done so easy in D1. Sometimes I've seen a message to defeat enemies in one location, only to realize the kills were counting elsewhere instead. Perfection was not struck upon here. There is a vendor in each patrol location now, which is neat. The game boasts that returning to orbit is no longer required from one place to another, but the orbit animation remains unchanged, making the claim seem comical. What they should have said was that travel time is shorter. Vendors in the main social space seem as oddly placed as ever, and many serve much less purpose than others. Faction vendors are no longer a constant, having been turned into a time event. The competition aspect underlying this change is interesting, but the absence of factions most weeks makes for an emptier world. There seems to be a ton of pointless and unfinished space at the tower, and the farm is rendered pointless upon completion of the campaign. Xur can now be found on the map each weekend. Personally, I think this takes all the fun out of finding him. I have no complaints about the new version of the Destiny app. It's nice to see Bungie incorporate some of what other applications were doing for them previously. The Vault is still apt to prove too small for dedicated users. Vaults now have sort capabilities, but alphabetical isn't among them, meaning duplicate items must still be eyeballed. You can hold L2 in the menus to see power level and damage type for all items. I like that. Collections, sadly, are no more for the most part. The hope for me was that everything legendary or higher would have a collection kiosk in Destiny 2, but instead we were rolled backward to the exotics-only formula for collections. Leveling is akin to the first game as far as the basics go. You'll level to 20, at which point raising your power level through better gear drops becomes the name of the game. Bungie introduced new barriers and tired methods here though, presumably to keep you playing for longer via pointless padding in lieu of fun. It used to be that you could infuse any primary into another primary and the levels would remain even. Now the weapon types must match, for example, sidearm to sidearm, and the power value could be higher or lower depending on certain factors. Also, you can no longer infuse armor between classes, so boosting a warlock with Titan armor is a no-go. I'd hoped for a change in the opposite direction with the ability to share at least a single piece of gear with a friend once per week or so. No dice. Please note that unless you're in search of specific gear, the fastest way to move up in the world is by playing public events for the increased shot at exotic Ingrams. If you want a pro tip, you can game their system in your favor by adding legendary mods to your equipped weapons and armor. This adds 5 power points to every piece of gear you apply it to. Exotics have legendary mods by default, but you can only have one exotic armor piece or weapon active at once, So it's recommended that you infuse into an exotic, then put the exotic into your legendary to get your power up. Exotics can be pulled from your vault collections at will at any time, so make use of this concept. Exotics boost the power of a dropped item by 5 additional points when infusing, meaning they are a powerhouse for infusion needs. Lastly, remember that high power weapons may still move freely between classes. Armor and weapons act a bit differently in Destiny 2. You'll notice armor now changes perks for mobility, resilience, and recovery. These used to be in the subclass perk trees, and armor controlled recharge rates for abilities. How do you control recharge rates now, you may be asking? Again, you're looking at using the mod slots to achieve this. Look forward to running the same subclass though, because most mods affecting ability recharge rates require that you use a specific damage type. Weapons are the most different of all things to consider in this game. Some new weapon types have been added, such as submachine guns, grenade launchers, and trace rifles. Shotguns and sniper rifles are only available in the heavy slots now, and you can have 2 primary weapons equipped at once, one which deals a damage type, such as solar, void, or arc, and one which doesn't. They made some balancing changes to the equation, which makes the primary with the damage modifier much more useful against shielded enemies. So if you can match the damage type to the shield, you'll do massive damage. On the flip side, this renders the average primary pretty useless in high-end situations. Also, the sniper rifle may as well be dead to you now. Apart from this, the balance is better overall, and the firefights require more thought. Be warned that bullet drop and damage fall off are now very real. You'll notice that you can infuse a matching primary into a secondary and vice versa. It's not as straightforward as you may be used to, but helpful to keep in mind. Some exotic armors and 1 exotic weapon are recycled in this outing, though often nerfed until barely recognizable. Most new exotics have lackluster perks. Where new ideas exist, most are clearly leftovers from the cutting room floor of the first game. The good exotics, however, are extremely good. In no time at all, you'll have found legendaries you like, and those few weapons are all you'll ever use now that the weapon rolls are static. Not counting exotics, armors are just for show. Destiny 2 doesn't reinvent the wheel when it comes to enemy AI and engagements. In fact, it fails to introduce a new enemy race at all. Siva-spliced foes are inexplicably absent, as are most enemy houses. I recognize we defeated Siva, but that hasn't stopped everything else from making a reappearance. There are a handful of new types within the races, and some AI tweaks have been made, which improve the overall experience. The world is more consistently deadly now. You will be sought out or run from with greater vigor, and the detection range is superior to D1. This isn't always a good thing though, as high-value enemies can outrun you while moving backwards, and you'll likely die in the menus without a good hiding spot. Other games have done a better job making smart and tactically motivated enemies, but that doesn't mean what's here isn't both satisfying and challenging in places. Much of the fun in Destiny has always been the ability to mow through lots of enemies with a fair amount of ease once your level is appropriately high. That remains intact in Part 2, and lots of engagements were designed with skill and team tactics in mind. Reviewers can and have found places to stand in the war zones of these worlds without being hurt, but their presentations of these rare spots as representative of the larger experience is disingenuous. Many bosses take on a more bullet-spongy approach than we're used to, making the bosses align with games like The Division. This dulls the experience for me to a noticeable degree. Some bosses rely on mixed tactics though, which is occasionally a leg up on the first game. There are also slight improvements to certain enemy designs, such as the Shriekers no longer exploding into energy chasers you must run from, the developers instead opting to have them be deadlier when alive and kicking. Story is the part of the game we're forever listening to naysayers whine about. If you only ever played the launch iteration of D1, then you understand why. I believe the reason many reviewers are split on Destiny 2's offering is because reviewers were on and off of the original game's bandwagon at differing points, most not getting further than the base game as it released years ago. For said reviewers, of course this game looks like something superior. If you were along for the entire ride up to now, however, you'll likely agree that A, Destiny's writers have done better than this in the past, I'm looking at you, Taken King, and B, Destiny 2's storyline leaves far too much behind and renders the original story legless. What do I think about the new campaign? The first time in, it felt good playing new content. Having heard one of the Bungie leads say he hoped people would complain that the second game had too much story, the notion seemed preposterous to me when the campaign revealed its short length. Some of the writing is super cheesy, the pacing is okay at best, there are plot holes aplenty, the dependence upon Cade is disappointing, nothing is fleshed out well, including both new and old characters, there is no difficulty setting to be found, not guaranteeing a Sparrow until campaign completion is shameful padding, the game lacks memorable bosses beyond the main foe, Many great characters from D1 have inexplicably vanished. Newcomers will not understand the game's backstory well, and closure for the first game's story was outright ignored. Worthy of additional mention is the absent drive of your foes. They took the darkness away and replaced it with nothing, creating a hollow heart at the game's center. There is also a heavy emphasis on magic now instead of scientific advancement. It's as though everyone in the game's universe has been studying old lore and Golden Age technologies, only to surmise that magic done did it all. It's sad to see, made worse when you realize that the game's main boss is the only one who seems interested in approaching the power of light as something worthy of study. Honestly, each needless change, such as light now being power, feels like an olive branch to the masses who will never play this game for long. The result every time is a lesser experience than D1's final form. The original game's lore seems largely irrelevant thanks to this outing. If you look at the reveal trailer, you'll see glimpses of what this could have been. Not only an advancement of the original game's plot, but also a deep dive into the backstory of the world's characters. Why is this studio continuously teasing us with story elements and conclusions which do not end up existing? Honestly, I must wonder if the full experience was yet again held back to appease the almighty dollar over the coming years, as this is very far removed from too much story, or a complete story. Even cliffhanger-happy writers like those from the Walking Dead series give us some closure before moving us on to the next problem. They especially don't have us jump a hurdle when there's a mountain to address. In the end, that's what this game's storyline amounts to. With regard to activities, let me start by pointing out that much of what you'd be used to as a D1 player is gone. Specifically, the ability to replay missions or choose individual strikes from a world map outside of special circumstances. Heroic missions or quests obtained from Ikora. This is all you're offered in the way of replayability. The story playlist is gone. Contrarily, strikes are only available from the dedicated playlist, and they roll at random. Both design choices take away freedom from the player, resulting in a less cluttered map, but a much emptier world. Despite the game working to convey that this is a denser experience, Patrol is largely unchanged. Patrol missions will be familiar to D1 players. There are still chests to open and materials to collect, high-value targets can occasionally be found, and everything moves in predictable cycles. What's different is that most things you do in patrol areas earn currency you turn into the area's world vendors to level them. There are region chests on the map which give you triple the currency of normal chests, and possibly other goodies. Each location has 3 daily challenges you can complete, visible most of the time by bringing up your ghost. I say most of the time because it doesn't always show up when you want it to. The developers had everyone psyched over the addition of lost sectors, but these proved to be areas which are poorly hidden, with only a weak boss and a loot chest at the end. You can buy weekly treasure maps from Cade, which drop good loot when found. Just be careful not to open these too quickly or else you risk getting no loot at all. Flashpoints sounded like something cool, but are just the game's way of saying, play a few public events. Public events are visible on the map, and seem to occur almost too frequently to feel interesting. What is interesting about them is that you can unlock heroic versions of each by performing certain tasks during the encounters. Heroic versions should have been much more difficult to unlock and complete though, but at least the baseline of a promising concept is present. There are side quests to be played in the patrol areas now as well. These too are among the better parts of Destiny 2, but too short-lived. Daily bounties from vendors are a thing of the past. Milestones are always the same, resetting each week. The trophy list is small and dull. The grimoire and corresponding score are nowhere to be found. Your ghost can scan more things at random throughout the worlds. All those servitors though. But there's no tracking what you've already seen or heard. Collectibles are gone. The record books are gone. Arena modes, such as Prison of Elders, Court of Oryx, and Archon's Forge, you guessed it, they're gone. The Nightfall strikes are now timed. Fail the clock, and you're starting back at the beginning. This generally encourages players to skip over many strike engagements, and you're left wondering why any developer would force you to fly through the world they built for you. Few things are as frustrating as getting to that final boss and realizing you won't have enough time to take it down. I never thought I'd say this, but I would have preferred the original Nightfall setup wherein you had to start over only if your team wiped. I think the time strikes are interesting as a concept, perhaps worthy of being a new strike playlist in and of itself, but as the primary mechanic of Nightfall strikes, it immediately halted my enjoyment of the game up to that point. Did I mention there's no buff for completing the Nightfall? There's not even an animation to indicate your character has beaten it, such as the first game had, and the rewards do not feel worth the effort of memorization and near-flawless play you're tasked with. Strike-specific loot, that's gone as well. Let's talk about the raid. The Leviathan Raid is a chore, an out-of-place one at that. The visual appeal of it is undeniable, but it's void of some key elements, like raid gear which helps with the raid itself, interesting bosses which drop satisfying loot with regularity, thematic consistency, etc. You'll get more gear from a sweeper robot at the tower with currency acquired in the raid than you do from any of the bosses. Why are we fighting through a Cabal palace instead of seeing how the world-eating machine functions? It all feels out of place, ideas stapled together despite their dissonance. This was a perfect opportunity to bring the majority of Destiny players who never played a raid into the fold. What we got instead was a convoluted mess, easily my least favorite of any Destiny raid. The emphasis is on weak puzzle mechanics. There's a large area in this location which goes unused for no good reason, many chests are void of contents, and the lack of helpful gear perks points to the fundamental weaknesses at play here. I wouldn't fault anyone for skipping over this part of the game. As far as Crucible goes, the multiplayer in Destiny 2 cuts a large portion of player freedom from the equation by forcing you into one of two playlists, both of which are highly competitive despite their descriptions. Many game modes have been cut, and all the main modes are now 4v4. Private matches and the ability to choose a particular mode, map, or modifier are no more. Daily challenges must apply to all game modes in a given playlist, and therefore are wildly generic, often related simply to kill types. SRL is also a thing of the past. Trials and Iron Banner continue to exist much the way they always have, except for being 4v4 now. The game modes are hit or miss. I admit I'm in the minority who seems to be enjoying them. The new maps aren't wowing me, but I don't dislike them either. The competitive playlist misses the mark by not offering anything in the way of incentive over quick play. The differences in playlists are merely the game modes within each type. Time to die has been increased slightly, a welcome change, but weapon balance issues continue to run rampant. Generally speaking, this is a game of auto and scout rifles. Heavy ammo spawns more often around the map, but may only be picked up by a single player. Lastly, you'll probably only get a single super use per match. The game is clearly geared toward PvP balance over PvE, which makes these Crucible shortcomings even more baffling. Here are some additional considerations. While nitpicky, the game does an odd thing graphically when swapping your weapon to heavy in social spaces, by which I mean it cycles to the primary before going to heavy, and it's weird looking. Until reaching max power, assuming you care about such things, you'll often be stuck using weapons you don't enjoy, because of the infusion mechanics. I fear that most of what's wrong here isn't fixable, because the core mechanics for longevity and customization have been factored out of their former glory. There's an excellent review of Destiny 2 on YouTube by SkillUp, wherein the problems this game has regarding the hedonic treadmill and appearance as a minimum viable product are discussed at length, the short of which is to say that this game does the least it possibly could to be successful and goes against the fundamental grain of what keeps us wanting to play beyond campaign completion. I had a wish list of wants for the first Destiny game, and Destiny 2 has only made that list longer. Not counting what was stripped away and what I've already mentioned, here's what I'd like to someday see realized in the Destiny 2 experience. 4 to 5 player fire team activities outside of PvE. Space battles, or true uses for ships at the least. The ability to be a human capable of being in or underwater would be nice. Stealth and tactical gameplay emphasis. The ability to name our characters. A more robust character creator. New classes such as a human who can suffer permadeath. Stronger PvP match editing options like no abilities or weapon matches, etc. Split screen functionality. The ability to skip campaign replays on characters number 2 and 3. Missions held in PvP maps, which was a Destiny 1 perk. The inclusion of all legacy locations in future DLC. PvP meets PvE activities such as fire teams racing to complete a strike fastest. All legacy exotics making a return. The ability to view profiles of players while they're offline. More strike playlist variation, in essence, randomized weapon loadouts, limited fire team lives, and so on. Guns on sparrows, or firing capability while on a sparrow. Social record challenges like, hey, your friend beat this mission with X amount of score, let's see you top it. The ability to change activities and leave a fire team in tandem. Clan leveling, which isn't slower for smaller clans. And finally, play as the enemy type game modes. It's not all been bad. I've discussed some positives, and here are the remainders I made note of. Character builds transferred from D1 with great ease. The new game started out by paying decent homage to what we went through in the first game. The new emotes, even the base emotes, are a step in the right direction. The game's cutscenes were fun to watch, certain missions added variety. Yes, I'm thinking of the vehicular missions, I'm sorry, Angry Joe. There are still neat secrets in this world to be discovered by curious players. The locking in of loadouts during nightfall strikes. The fast leveling buff offered for the first 3 levels after each weekly reset. And fire team medallions replacing numerous consumables to greater and longer lasting effect. In defense of Destiny, this series has always had its detractors, and I think many of them have very valid criticisms. Where I differ from them, though, is that I am very much passionate about the potential Destiny has and sometimes delivers on. There's an argument becoming more and more common which claims Destiny is a symbol of everything that's wrong with gaming, because it's a loot game which fails to deliver on sensible storytelling. I agree with the latter half of that sentiment, but not the former. Destiny is no more a symbol of something being wrong with gaming than Minecraft is. Both games have taken hundreds of hours from my life and put them to use in a way which I found to be highly enjoyable. And both games miss the mark of storyline found in games like Skyrim or The Witcher 3. What I believe some people forget is that story isn't always what makes a great game. I grew up with classics which had almost no discernible story to speak of, and I never once heard that those games were ruining video games as an art form. Story can make a mediocre game good, or a great game even better. But story isn't the only means through which we interact with this medium, and therefore cannot account for the totality of our opinions as they relate to video games. If story is most important to you, then yes, steer clear of the games people like myself enjoy. Please do try to recognize, though, that some of us differ in what we take pleasure in, and that doesn't mean either of us are more right or wrong than the other, merely that we're different. If asked about the story aspect of a game, I'd be inclined to trust your opinion on the matter for the masses over my own. I'd never discount you as the cancer equivalent of gamers. In the description of this video, you'll see charts that show the ebb and flow of Destiny content from the beginning until now. The first number is what D1 began with, the second number is what D1 ended with, and the third number is what Destiny 2 brought with it at launch. Please note the laughable differences in story missions between launches, and bear in mind that most of the Destiny 2 totals could have been added to the overall total of D1's final form, making the new offering even more insulting to player sensibilities. It can be argued convincingly that Destiny 2's story missions are much more valuable than those of the first game, but the total should still drive home the fact that there's no massive storyline in Destiny 2, as was claimed by its creators. This visual aid certainly clarifies that the development goal was to ensure these two games appeared to match in launch states. Such things make sense in most game worlds, but longtime fans were hoping this would not be what we've grown accustomed to from other experiences, and that we might actually be building upon the same game world over the at least 10-year span. This would put the game in line with ever-expanding universes like World of Warcraft, but that's no longer a realistic consideration for legacy Destiny fans. Bungie did not deliver on those implied expectations. We appear to be starting mostly from scratch with each numbered iteration, and fans will have to decide if they're okay with that. Personally, I plan to keep playing, but this has changed my approach to franchise loyalty. In the grand scheme, this is apt to mean that I'm no longer an early adopter of Destiny content, opting to await sales or final forms before buying in. Also, never again will I spend another cent on Eververse items. Never. I can't be the only one reaching these conclusions, and Bungie's finances will suffer because of their poor player base appreciation. In conclusion, if you feel like you're a lab mouse trying all of Bungie's ideas on for size, that's because you are. Destiny 2 is the odd result of a company wanting to try new things, create a competitive multiplayer following, and appeal to casual players all at the same time. Rarely is this game a service to the players won over by the first game, those looters among us who occasionally enjoy fun in the Crucible and prefer the maximum amount of content and customization. I realize this review sounds negative in the extreme, but that's mostly because I had high hopes for the follow-up to one of my favorite games of all time. Maybe this poor start will not actually end up being a sign of things to come. This is a stronger start than the original Destiny saw, after all, even if far less than it ever should have been. So perhaps in a few years, this game will rival or even outshine its predecessor. That still seems a reasonable outlook to assume. Sticking with our by-the-numbers approach, in the description you can also find my ratings for the 3 considerable forms of Destiny thus far. May the light stay with you, my fellow Guardians, and thank you for taking the time to listen to my thoughts.